August 17th, 1859. The auction hall on Broughton Street, Savannah's largest, fell into a silence so complete it felt like a thing with weight, as lot number 43 stepped onto the platform. 27 men held paddles that afternoon, ready to claim whatever fate money could buy. Within minutes, only one hand remained raised. The woman in chains was young, hale, practiced in the small mercies of domestic labor. Her cataloged price was set deliberately low, yet something in that room made every planter's gaze slide away. Something they murmured about in halls and at dinner tables, never aloud, always in half-sentences and sidelong glances. One man, newly arrived from Charleston, did not yet know how to listen for those half-spoken warnings. He paid $12 for a woman worth $200. 6 months later, he would learn why the auction house had gone so still. By then, it would be far too late for him to bargain his way back out of what he had bought. Before we proceed to Chatham County, a small obligation to this business of stories. These are the voices we keep listening for. They come from corners the light misses. They are the histories you might prefer not to know. They are the work of this channel. But now, the purchase that would unspool everything. The Broughton Street building had been in use since 1842. Thousands of transactions had passed beneath that sagging roof, each one tidy in its ledger, obscene in its consequences. The air inside that August afternoon was thick with tobacco smoke, unwashed heat, and the sour fear that money could not whitewash. Yet there was another thing in the room, a tension like a held breath that made even seasoned traders shift uneasily in their seats. Savannah in 1859 glittered with the profit of cotton. The port pushed out bushels by the million, and the plantations that fed it competed and bled for the most able hands. Chatham County's soil was black and generous, and its planters were not gentle men. Thomas Cornelius Puett arrived in Savannah 3 weeks before the auction. At 34, he carried new money and the impatience that often travels with it. His father had speculated in Charleston cotton and left him a fortune more complete than taught. Thomas bought Waverly unseen, 800 acres along the Vernon River, a house of columns in need of paint, 42 enslaved people listed with the deed. His overseer, a lean man named Hutchkins, told him bluntly he needed 60 hands if he expected to coax a harvest from that land. So Thomas came to Broughton Street that August morning with cash and the sort of determination that confuses purchase with ownership. By noon, he had spent nearly $5,000 on field hands and a cook. During the lunch lull, he drifted close enough to overhear planters, voices low as if the subject were contagion. "You staying for the afternoon?" one asked. "No. Got what I came for. Besides, you hear? They're finally selling her. Been in the pens 3 weeks. Nobody wants her. Can't believe what happened at the Peyton place." The words came out in small eruptions. 3 men dead in 2 months. 4, if you counted old Peyton himself, though the doctor called it heart. Thomas stepped back before they could see his curiosity. When the afternoon session resumed, several morning bidders did not return. The first lots moved quickly. Then the woman called Lot 43 stepped up. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed made of contraries, bound and yet unbowed, eyes dark and still as if they had learned the weight of looking and then stopping. Probably 32, the auctioneer said, name of Celia, experienced in household duties, midwife and herb doctor, literate in English, no known defects, starting bid $10. The room went viscous with hush. $10 was an insult for a woman who could deliver babies and treat the ill. Midwives stretched across county lines. offering services a planter paid for and a community depended upon. "Do I hear 10? The auctioneer prodded. Men looked at floors, at hands, at smoke thick in the rafters, anything but the woman on the platform. Thomas raised his paddle. 10 to the gentleman in the blue coat, the auctioneer said fast, almost relieved. "Do I hear 12? Nothing. Going once, twice, sold for 10. The gavel cracked. Celia turned toward Thomas then, and for the first time she looked at him not like an object, but like an assessor of some very private sum. Her face did not change, but something in those dark eyes flickered. Recognition, or the rapid calculation of consequence. He found her name again behind the clerk's ink later. Peyton Estate inventory after Mr. Peyton's death 3 months prior. The clerk's pen hesitated when Thomas asked about the quiet. "Came from the Peyton place," he said. "Liquidated after his death. Listed skills are accurate. Not my place to ask why folks pass on a bid, sir." The total on Thomas's slip read $6,710. The drive to Waverly took an hour along the river. The house rose with its 6 solemn columns, paint flaking like old bone. Quarters, long and weathered, filed behind it. Beyond them, the cotton lay in ranks beneath the horizon. Hutchkins sorted the new arrivals into gangs. The cook took to the kitchen. But when it came to Celia, Hutchkins hesitated, as if the land itself had put the question to him. "Where do you want this one, Mr. Pewitt?" Thomas, thinking of the mid-season strains on his fields, said, "She has medical training. Put her with old patients. Let her be midwife. Set her in the old overseer's cabin near the quarters." Hutchkins agreed, though not eagerly. "We already have old patients who tend to such things," he said. "2 hands are better than 1. Before Thomas could press the unease from his chest, a visitor arrived on the porch. Josiah Crenshaw, a heavy man in casual finery, the same planter Thomas had heard at the auction. After bourbon and small talk, Crenshaw set down his glass and leveled his gaze. "You bought Celia for $10? he asked. When Thomas admitted it, Crenshaw exhaled like a man who has been holding something dangerous in his mouth. "She came from the Peyton estate. Dr. Harold Peyton died 3 months back. Sudden, they said. But before that, his overseer raving, his driver found broken, the physician gone. All men tied to the house. Folks said the woman knew her herbs. They said she complained when her daughter died, called the doctor a drunk. She was whipped and locked away. 2 weeks later, folks started dropping dead. Could be coincidence, could be not. But she knows what cures and what kills, and she had nothing left to lose." Crenshaw's warning came like gravel. "If I were you, I'd sell her off quick, or put her in the fields where she can't touch anyone's food or drink." That evening, Thomas found Celia in the small cabin assigned to her. She sat with the straight posture of someone who had learned to hold themselves against things that tried to bend them. She rose when he entered, and the first thing he noticed were those eyes. Still, patient, the kind that had learned how to wait out storms. "You're Celia," he said. "Yes, master." "You're a midwife, a herbalist? Where did you learn?" "My mother," she answered. "Her mother before her. I watched, then did. I could read when I found books." The simplicity of her account landed with an old weight. Thomas tried the obvious question. Rumors about Peyton. Celia answered without surprise. "People die, master. That is the certain thing. White folks talk loud when they don't understand. They called me dangerous. Said debts come due. Maybe they were right. Maybe debts do come due." The words could have been an old proverb or a threat. Thomas stepped toward the practical. Did you kill them? Her mouth curled without warmth. Can't kill a man with words, master. If they died, it was Providence or their own sins catching up. I'm a slave. I do what I'm told. He told her she would work as midwife, tending births and illness under old patients' watch. She bowed. Yes, master. And what happened at Peaton stays there. Here we start fresh. She meant it. He wanted to believe her. Night found Thomas restless, imagining his land stacked with coffins and gravediggers, thinking of a mother's grief and what desperate hands might learn in the dark. He thought of herbs and how the same leaf that eases a fever might finish a heart. Most of all, he thought of 4 dead men and 1 woman who had, in the end, been sold for $10. The ledger did not yet reveal which way the scales would fall. The plantation slept under a wide, indifferent sky. Somewhere, something watchful kept counting. The storm that came in late September moved like an absence, wind and water erasing the neat geometries of the fields. Trees bowed until their crowns were horizontal. Rain came so thick it reduced the world to a smear. When the hurricane finally spent itself, Waverly wore the damage like a new skin. 20% of the crop ruined. Roof shingles torn from quarters, a section of the overseer's house peeled back as if the plantation's neat life had been wrung out. Then, as the sun returned and the work resumed, it began with children. Fever, hacking coughs, a deep rattling that sounded like something trying to leave the body and could not. Then the adults folded into it. Within a week, 23 people lay ill across the cabins and the main house, and the young county doctor who hurried out from Savannah looked small amid the moan and steam of the sick room. He wrote his prescriptions with the confidence of habit: calomel, rest, bloodletting when the pulse suggested it, and left with the polite assurance that the fever would pass. Thomas, who had seen enough of markets and men to prefer the certainty of ledgers to the vagaries of rumor, told Celia to follow the doctor's instructions. She looked at him and said, "Calomel makes it worse. It weakens the body faster than the fever. Doctors kill more than they save." Her voice was not insolent. It carried a knowledge that had been earned in kitchens, in barns, in the quiet of watching ailing bodies eave. He should have dismissed her tone. Instead, he found himself conceding. Practicality and a creeping self-interest won out. "Do it your way," he said. "If they die, it's on you." She smiled once, not without something like pity. "People dying is always someone's responsibility, master. The question is, whose?" She organized the sick by severity. Herbs measured with a scrupulous hand, teas brewed, wounds dressed with poultices grounded in an intimacy with plants that felt older than the county itself. She insisted on boiled water, on separating the sick from the well, on beds distant enough to stop the air from carrying the sickness like a rumor. 3 days later, the first fevers broke. A week after that, all but 2 of the sufferers had rallied. The remaining 2 were old and already thin with a lifetime of small cruelties. News moved across Chatham County with the velocity of gossip. Celia had saved 21 people. Suddenly, planters who had once crossed the street to avoid her presence were knocking on Thomas's parlor door, hat in hand, asking to borrow her skill. Fees followed, and with them the strange economy of necessity. A woman whose knowledge could not be legislated suddenly had a currency of her own. But utility is a brittle shield. Rumor reasserted itself, unfurling memories of the Peaton house and the men who died after Celia's daughter passed. Whispers coexisted with gratitude. The ledger that kept score in Celia's mind, a ledger of debts, of scales, did not erase the old stories. It rebalanced them. Danger sat beside usefulness at the table. December came with frost, and the harvest that had survived the hurricane was turned into a respectable sale. Thomas allowed himself a brittle sense of triumph. He had weathered his first year of ownership and come through with profit and a reputation intact. Then, with the quiet ferocity of small things, the plantation's unease returned. One morning, Hutchkins found his prize-hunting dog dead near the well, mouth foaming, body taut with cruelty. A week later, a field hand named Samuel clutched his belly and convulsed, symptoms that matched plant-based toxins and nothing else. Celia examined him and said bluntly, "Poison." The word landed like a stone. Samuel died within hours. Panic migrated through the quarters like smoke. Thomas ordered a search, questions asked in narrow, efficient circles that produced only more silence. Samuel had eaten from the communal pot. He had drunk from the well. No enemy had come forward. The possibility forced itself on Thomas's sleep. Someone was testing methods, practicing on the small, perhaps preparing for a larger intent. Then, on a frosty Christmas night, the plantation gathered beneath the torches near the quarters, as if drawn to a calamity. A young house servant named Ruth had been seized by a sudden, incoherent terror. She screamed about voices in her head, about shadows and debts coming due, a phrase Thomas remembered with a coldness that clung to the air. Ruth tried to throw herself into the well. She spat accusations and names, then, eyes wild, turned to Celia as if to a lodestar. You know," she cried. "You understand. Tell them." Celia stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, as if the night had been waiting for her to move. She laid 2 fingers to Ruth's forehead and spoke softly. Her hands smelled of herbs. "Hush," she said. "No need for confession. What's done is done." She uncorked a small bottle and held it to Ruth's lips. Chamomile, poppy extract, valerian, sedatives that would quiet a mind long enough to sleep. Ruth drank and within minutes quieted. She slept, and when she woke, she was quiet, like someone who has been made small by remorse. Days later, Ruth stopped breathing altogether. Celia pronounced it heart failure from overwhelming distress. The coroner listed natural causes. The murmurs did not stop. That murmur became a windedness in Thomas's chest. He began to watch Celia with a surveillance that felt like betrayal, checking the herbs she sent to the house, inspecting bottles, keeping his own meals under his eye. He found himself caught between relief for the lives she had saved and a slow, mounting sense of complicity with whatever method she had been teaching. When he broke into her cabin in the hush of an icebound January to rifle through the neat order of jars and bundles, he expected to find nothing but the utensils of a healer. He found that, and something else. Beneath bundles of sweetgrass and dried rue, he located a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were notebooks. At first they read like a practitioner's record. Dosages, plant names, charts of fevers and recoveries. Then the tone shifted. October 15th. 23 sick, 21 saved. The power to heal is the power to choose who lives. They think my knowledge belongs to them because they own my body. Knowledge cannot be owned. I share it with those who deserve it. I withhold it from those who do not. Every life saved is a debt. Every death allowed is a balancing. Pages later, dated December 20th, an entry about a girl who asked for an answer to a shame. I gave her knowledge, not my judgment. She chose the mushroom. She will not live long. Guilt will eat her first. This is mercy. Thomas's hands trembled as he read. The entries were not clinical notes. They were judgment rendered in ink, a ledger of power and moral accounting. He carried the papers back into the small sitting room and waited, the book like a heat in his palms, as if the cabin itself listened. Celia returned to the doorway with the quiet of someone who knew she was expected. "Your wife is asking for you, master," she said, an equivocation that tasted like a rebuke. Thomas did not deny the intrusion. He held the notebooks out and watched her face fold through a dozen expressions and settle into an honesty he could not buy. "You've been in my things," he said. There was no shame left in the statement, only a tired, pragmatic anger. She sat as if she had been waiting to tell the story that would make men choose. When she finally spoke, it was not to apologize. "My Sarah was 17, she said. "She was strong. Dr. Vance came to treat her, and he was drunk. He bled her and dosed her with calomel. I was whipped for speaking. I was tied and kept in the barn while she called for me. I watched her die." Her hands tightened. "I did what I had to do. Foxglove over time made his heart fail. Marcus died because he helped hold me down. Kelly died because he laughed as they beat me. Peyton died because his property made my daughter's death possible." Her voice did not call it vengeance. It called it accounting. "I saved 21 when the fever came," she said. "I delivered 37 living children. I take and I give. The ledger balances." Thomas felt the world tilting, like a house whose foundation has been undermined by water. The notebooks were not evidence of random malice. They were a philosophy, medicine used as a scale, mercy measured against an old and intimate arithmetic of harm and recompense. Celia had a system and an endgame. She had the patience to let human guilt become its own executioner. "Ruth came for knowledge," she admitted in the hush of the cabin. "I taught her what to do. She chose badly. I gave her peace because she could not live with what she had done. Mercy can be a kind of cruelty." Thomas stood between outrage and awe. The plantation had always moved in ledger lines of profit and loss. Celia had merely converted that accounting to a violent moral clarity. He could report her and be rid of the danger. He could insist on law and carry the paper to Savannah. But the law had never listened to a woman whose life was counted in hand and hours. It had never made restitution for a daughter sold into a house that bled itself into the night. And Waverly would be left without its healer. The choice lay on him like a weight. When the sound of the river outside the cabin seemed loud enough to drown the words, Celia rose and said simply, "I don't ask for your forgiveness. I only ask you decide what you will be when your ledger is called. Some men I kill, most I save. That is my work." She left him with the notebooks and the bitter nitrogen smell of drying herbs. The winter light thinned to bone and Thomas sat at his table. The pages spread before him like a map of consequence. And for the first time in his life, he understood the arithmetic of a kind of justice he had never been taught to reckon. He did not sleep the night after she left him in that small, failing cabin. Something in the air felt wrong, like the plantation itself had shifted its weight, waiting to see which way its master would lean. Hutchins's wife died at dawn the next day, just as Celia had said. Her breath thinned across the night until it dissolved. Hutchins sat beside her until the last heat left her skin, and then something inside him caved. A man held together by duty and cruelty can fall all at once when the tether breaks. He whispered apologies to no one in particular. He drank until the days blurred. By February, he was useless, and Thomas promoted Daniel, not because he trusted Celia's prediction, though he did, but because Daniel was sensible and kind, qualities the plantation needed more than a whip. Celia's reputation swelled across the county like a tide, inexorable, drawn by the moon of need. Women from neighboring plantations arrived seeking her counsel while their masters pretended not to notice, or asked Thomas to lend her out as though she were an instrument rather than a mind. Every birth she delivered safely, every fever she broke, every wound she closed, lifted her standing. Thomas found himself accepting fees he no longer felt entitled to. He kept them anyway. She earned money, he collected it. It was a kind of theft, he knew, but he also knew that she allowed it because it tethered him to her. Debt in reverse, power in plain sight. Then came the man from Charleston, Robert Peaton, nephew of the deceased doctor. He rode with purpose, carrying the smell of salt and distance, and accused Thomas of harboring a murderer. Thomas offered him bourbon. Peaton refused. "She killed my uncle," he said plainly. "She killed the overseer, the driver, the physician. She'll kill you too." Thomas said Celia was not for sale. Peaton warned him the way a man warns someone standing too close to a cliff. "My uncle thought he was safe because he owned her. He was wrong. That woman isn't owned. She chooses." When he left, Thomas watched the horse's hooves throw dust up in anxious little spirals. He felt the warning settle into him like a sickness. That night, for the first time, he cataloged the dead. Samuel, Ruth, Hutchkins's wife, the elderly field hand, the house girl who fell on the stairs. He wrote their names, dates, causes. Then he wrote the names of the 21 Celia had saved. He wrote the babies she delivered alive. He wrote the fees she had earned by healing white families who would never have touched her shadow 3 months earlier. The ledger was obscene in its clarity. Death did follow her, but so did life. The scales in her notebooks were not metaphorical. She held a balance in her mind with a steadiness he envied and feared. He tried to protect himself. He began eating only what he prepared. He slept with his pistol ready and the door barred. He avoided her the way one avoids a truth that must eventually be spoken. But Celia had watched men all her life. She recognized precaution like another plant in her garden. One morning in April, he found a cloth bundle at his door. Herbs he could not name, tied with twine, a note in her even handwriting. "For your health, master. It will ease the tension you carry and help you sleep. A gift from someone who wishes you no harm, as long as you continue to deserve none." He burned the herbs, but the message burned longer. If she wanted him dead, he would be dead. The grace she extended him was not born of fear or obedience. It was choice, and choice is its own kind of power. In early May, Hutchkins drank himself to death with a leftover bottle of laudanum Celia had once prepared for his wife. Whether he saved it from her belongings, or someone placed it in front of him, knowing grief would complete the rest, Thomas could not say. Daniel only told him quietly, man was already half gone. His body just followed. Thomas knew then what Celia had meant when she spoke of consequences that ripen on their own. Nothing supernatural, nothing forced. Just human weakness guided along the edge of itself. And then one afternoon, as the heat lay like a hand across the porch, Josiah Crenshaw returned. The planter looked older, as though the year had taken something from him and not given it back. "She's building something," he said. "A network. A circle of women. They speak of old ways. They speak of scales." Thomas listened, and to his own dread found himself answering, "Perhaps we deserve it." Crenshaw stared as if seeing a ghost. "You defend her now." Thomas did not deny it. He had crossed into a gray place where morality bent under the weight of necessity. Crenshaw left with a look of grief sharper than anger. Summer arrived. Fever and heat exhaustion crept through the fields, and Celia moved through the quarters like a force the season could not touch. Thomas watched her more closely than ever and saw the breadth of her. Healer, judge, teacher, keeper of centuries-old knowledge that had crossed an ocean in the memories of women no one would ever write about. She was a threat and a salvation, sometimes in the same breath. That was the truth that undid him the most. Then came the day in late June when she knocked at his study door and asked to speak alone. She sat with her hands folded, her face composed but carrying a fatigue he recognized as something deeper than weariness. "A man is coming tomorrow," she said. "Benjamin Leal, rice grower. You saw him at the auction. He refused to bid on me." Thomas nodded. "His daughter is dying," she continued. "He will ask you for my help." Her eyes were steady. "He was at Peaton's place the day they whipped me. He saw my daughter dying. He said nothing. Tomorrow I want him to understand what that silence cost." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. "You're going to let his daughter die?" "I'm going to hold a mirror," she said softly. "If he understands what it means to watch a child suffer while help stands aside, then I will decide. Justice does not always require death, Master. Sometimes it requires reflection." Then she leaned forward. "And you? Tomorrow you must choose. If you order me, you place yourself in my ledger. If you stay silent, you permit me to work." "Why warn me?" he asked quietly. "Because I don't want you to fall on the wrong side of the scales. Not yet." Thomas did not sleep that night. He watched the dark shift in the corners of his room, and sometimes he thought of Sarah, the girl he had never met whose death had changed the gravity of Celia's world. He thought of Catherine Lell, a girl the same age, waiting unknowingly on the other end of a man's failure. When Benjamin Lell arrived the next morning, he was hollow as a man walking behind his own funeral. "Please," he begged. "My daughter is dying. I've heard of your healer. Let her come. I'll pay anything." Thomas answered truthfully, "I will send her, but you must ask her yourself. She chooses." Lell nearly collapsed with gratitude and despair, and when Celia entered the room, Lell fell to his knees before her. "She's innocent," he sobbed. "Do not punish her for my sins." Celia watched him as if reading a scripture written in breath. "Do you remember the barn?" she asked. Lell trembled. "Yes," he whispered. "I looked away. I was a coward. I have lived with it every day since." His voice cracked. "Don't make my daughter suffer for what I failed to do." Silence widened in the room, deep enough to swallow a man whole. Then Celia reached down and lifted him to his feet. "Take me to her," she said. "I will see what can be done." Thomas felt something inside him shift. A plate in the earth he had not known was cracked. Before she left, Celia turned once more and said, "A debt remains. I will collect it one day. Not in coin, in remembrance, in what he chooses to be after this." 3 days later, she returned to Waverly and announced that Catherine Lell would recover. Healing, not retribution, had been the lesson Celia chose. "Fear changes a man's steps," she told Thomas, "but understanding changes his direction. He'll choose differently now, life for life, but not the way most expect the scales to tip." By late summer, the plantation itself felt altered. The enslaved workers carried themselves with a subtle defiance, quiet, thoughtful, rooted. Planters who had once laughed off folk medicine now approached Celia with hesitant reverence. Thomas himself moved through each day as though walking beside an unseen cliff, aware of every step he took. The war loomed like a storm swelling out of sight. Something was coming, and all of them, in their different ways, were preparing for an ending. It was September when Thomas summoned Celia to his study and told her he intended to manumit her. No conditions, no bargains. She regarded him with a long, measuring silence, then smiled, softly, truly. "You've learned," she said. "Not all I hoped, but enough. Enough to survive what's coming." She remained at Waverly, now as a free woman, and the plantation reshaped itself around this truth. Her network of healers expanded. Knowledge passed between hands like contraband scripture. And Thomas, for the first time, acted not as a master, but as a steward of a place whose true power no longer belonged to him. His last diary entry for 1859 carried the weary awe of a man who had watched something old crumble and something older rise. A reckoning, long in the making. A reminder that the most terrifying force is not always supernatural, but human knowledge, carried quietly by those the world tries hardest to silence, waiting for its moment to speak.